My mother told me once, when I was in my 30s and complaining about something my husband had done that frustrated me, that marriage was not about happiness, it was about endurance. She said it with the specific quality of conviction of someone who had internalized a truth through long practice. And I received it the way I received most things my mother told me in those years, with a surface acknowledgement and a private resistance that I did not yet have the understanding to articulate. I am 84 years old. My mother has been gone for 27 years, and I have been thinking about what she said for most of those decades, because she was both right and wrong in ways that took me until my late 60s to fully understand. She was right that marriage requires endurance. She was wrong that endurance and happiness are mutually exclusive propositions. She had arrived at her belief the way people arrive at beliefs that protect them from painful realities, which is by deciding that the painful reality is the inevitable one, and that the hope for something better is the thing to be surrendered. My name is Dorothy. I was married to a man named Robert for 52 years, from the age of 22 to the age of 74, when Robert died of a heart attack on a Tuesday morning that I had no warning was going to be different from any other Tuesday morning. I am not going to perform grief I do not fully have. Robert and I had a complicated marriage, and his death produced complicated feelings in me that took years to sort through, and that I am still, at 84, not entirely finished sorting. What I want to tell you is what those 52 years taught me, not as regret or not primarily as regret, though there is regret in it, as information. The kind of information that costs you something to have, and that is worth offering to anyone who is willing to receive it. The first thing I learned is about the difference between accepting someone and resigning to them. I accepted Robert in the early years. I saw who he was with the specific clarity of someone who is still curious about a person and who is finding out the full shape of them rather than managing the shape she already knows. I accepted his silences, which were deep and sometimes beautiful and sometimes suffocating. I accepted his specific form of love, which expressed itself through acts of practical service and rarely through words, which was the form I would have chosen. I accepted the life he wanted, which was quiet and ordered and close to home, which was not entirely the life I would have chosen, but which I chose in choosing him. The acceptance was genuine. It was the choosing of a real person with real qualities, rather than an idealized projection. The resignation came later. After 15 or 20 years, what had been acceptance had become, without my fully noticing the transition, the management of a familiar limitation rather than the genuine embrace of a specific person. I was no longer choosing Robert's silences. I was navigating around them. I was no longer choosing his quiet life. I was maintaining a version of it that was smaller than what either of us might have built if we had been more honest with each other. The resignation is not dramatic. That is what makes it so difficult to notice and so easy to maintain indefinitely. It looks like patience. It looks like the maturity that a long marriage produces. It feels from the inside like having arrived at an accommodation rather than at a surrender. But the accommodation was not what I wanted, and it was not what Robert wanted, and neither of us said so, and the years passed in the space between what we had and what we might have had, and neither of us named the space. The second thing I learned is about the specific cost of not being known. For most of my marriage, I presented a version of myself that was edited to fit the life we had agreed to live. Not dishonestly. The editing was partly unconscious and partly the ordinary accommodation of partnership. But the editing was real, and what it edited out over years was the parts of me that didn't fit. The ambition that made Robert uncomfortable. The intellectual restlessness that had no outlet in the life we lived. The particular quality of longing for things I could not entirely name, which I learned to manage by not naming them to myself or to anyone else. The parts of me that were edited out did not disappear. They went underground. They produced, over decades, a quality of unexpressed interior life that I eventually understood as a kind of private loneliness that existed alongside the marriage rather than being caused by it, because I had never given the marriage the full version of myself that might have been met differently. I do not know if Robert would have met the full version differently. That is the question I cannot answer, and that I have stopped trying to answer, because it leads nowhere useful. What I know is that the version of myself I offered was not the full one, and that the marriage that resulted was therefore not the full version of what a marriage between us could have been. This is a more painful truth than the truth about Robert's limitations. The easier version of the story is the version where the marriage was insufficient because he was insufficient. The truer version is that we were both insufficient, each in our own specific ways, and that the insufficiency was at least partly the product of the choices we each made about what to bring to the life we were sharing. The third thing I learned is about what endurance costs when it is not accompanied by honesty. My mother's endurance was real, and it produced a long marriage and a stable family, and the security that those things provide to children and to the adults who sustain them. I honor the endurance. I also know what it cost her, because she told me in the last years of her life what the marriage had been from the inside. And what she told me was not the story of a woman who had found happiness within the endurance, but of a woman who had made the endurance so complete that she had stopped noticing what was absent. The stopping noticing is the most expensive part. When you endure long enough without honesty, you lose reliable access to what you actually feel and what you actually need, which means you lose reliable access to the information that might change something, if there is anything to change. My mother, at the end, was not in a marriage that was bad. She was in a marriage that was nothing much, and she had been in it long enough that nothing much felt like the normal condition of a life. I almost followed her there. I did not get all the way there because Robert died, and the dying, whatever else it was, broke the pattern before the pattern became fully permanent. What I found after Robert died surprised me, and the surprise itself was information. I found that I had a very large amount of unexpressed interior life, that the years of the edited version had been accumulating, and that there were people in the world who wanted to know what was in it. and that the knowing was possible in ways that the marriage had not allowed, for reasons that were partly about Robert and mostly about the version of myself I had been offering. I found that I was interesting. I had suspected it somewhere underneath the management of the marriage, but I had not had the space to confirm it. In the years since Robert died, I have confirmed it, not arrogantly, with the specific, quiet satisfaction of a woman who spent 52 years offering the edited version, and who discovered, in her 70s and 80s, that the unedited one was considerably more than the edited one had been. What I would tell the woman in her 30s or 40s who is in the early or middle stages of a marriage that has the quality of quiet resignation: tell the truth, not as an ultimatum and not as an explosion, but as a steady, sustained practice of bringing more of the actual version of yourself into the life you are sharing. Say what you want. Say what you do not want. Say the thing you have been not saying because the saying feels dangerous or difficult or too likely to produce friction that the management of the marriage cannot absorb. The marriage may not be able to hold the actual version of you. That is also information worth having. A marriage that cannot hold the actual version of you is a marriage that is holding a performance and calling it a partnership. And a performance, however skilled and however sustained, is a performance and not the real thing. The real thing is worth pursuing, even late, even when the years of the performance have made the real thing hard to find. It is still there. It was there all along. It was waiting for the management to end and the honesty to begin. I am Lillian. I am 84 years old. My mother told me marriage was about endurance, and she was right and she was wrong. And I have spent most of my adult life understanding the difference. Endure, yes, but endure as yourself, not as the edited version, as the woman you actually are, with the full weight of what you carry and the full brightness of what you have to offer. The marriage that endures with that version of you in it is a different thing from the marriage that endures without it. Worth the risk of finding out which kind you have. You may still have time to find out. Use the time you have. I want to say something that I have not said yet about what the 52 years produced that I am genuinely grateful for, because I do not want this to be a story with only one kind of accounting. The 52 years produced my children, 3 specific, irreplaceable people who exist because of this specific combination of Robert and me and the specific circumstances of our life together, and who are, when I look at them honestly, the finest things I have been part of making. The marriage produced them. Whatever the marriage was and was not between Robert and me, it was the context in which 3 people were born and raised who are genuinely good and who are living genuinely worthwhile lives. That is not nothing. That is a great deal. The 52 years also produced a kind of deep practical knowledge about another person that is only available through the very long form of intimacy. I knew Robert in ways that required decades to know someone. I knew the specific quality of his silences, the ones that were peaceful and the ones that were troubled. I knew how he sounded when he was frightened, which he did not often show, and how he looked when he was genuinely delighted, which happened in ways that surprised me throughout our marriage. I knew the version of himself he showed no one else, the private Robert, the one that existed in the margins of the capable and reliable public man. Knowing someone that deeply is not nothing either. It is one of the experiences that long, intimate life makes possible, and that shorter forms of relationship do not. I would not trade that knowledge, even with the complications of how it was acquired. What I am saying is that the 52 years is not a simple ledger with all loss on one side and no gain on the other. It was a full life, complicated and in many respects good, that also contained what I have described: the resignation, the unexpressed self, the accumulated cost of the editing. Both things are true: the gratitude and the grief, the love and the limitation, the children who exist, and the woman who was partly suppressed in the producing of them. Holding both truthfully is what the years have finally given me the steadiness to do. In my 40s, I could not hold both. I chose one or the other, depending on what the moment required of me. Now I can hold them together, which is a different and more honest form of understanding. I want to offer this honesty to the women who are in the middle of the long marriage and who are reading this looking for either permission to leave or permission to stay. I cannot offer either of those permissions because they are not mine to give. What I can offer is the observation that the most important question is not whether to leave or stay. The most important question is whether the person who is present in the marriage, the one you are being in it, is the actual version of you or the edited one. If it is the edited version, the question to ask is why, and what would be required to bring more of the actual version in, and whether the marriage can hold that version if you bring it. The answer to those questions may be that the marriage cannot hold the actual version, in which case you have important information. The answer may be that the marriage can hold it, but has not been given the chance, in which case you also have important information. Either way, the information is more useful than the continuation of the performance without asking the questions. Ask the questions. The performance is comfortable in the way that familiar things are comfortable, but comfortable is not the same as alive. You deserve the alive version. You may still have time to inhabit it. Robert was not a bad man. I was not a bad woman. We were two people who loved each other in limited and often insufficient ways, and who built a limited but real life together, and who produced 3 people who are more than either of us would have been alone. The marriage was the sum of what we brought to it. I brought less than I had. I believe he did too, though I cannot speak for him now. I am speaking for myself. And what I would tell myself at 40, if I could, is to bring more. More of the real version, more of the unexpressed, more of the ambition and the restlessness and the longing, and the things that didn't fit the edited life. Not to blow up the marriage, to give it the chance to be more than it was being. It might have refused the chance. It might have become something better. I will never know. That is the cost of the editing. Do not pay that cost if you can avoid it. Bring more of yourself into your life, all the life you have, whatever life is left. It deserves the actual version of you in it. There is one more thing I want to say about the endurance, because my mother's word has been with me throughout this, and I want to give it its full due before I finish. Endurance is not a small thing. I do not want to have described 52 years in a way that makes the endurance sound like failure. The endurance was real, and it required something from me that I am not ashamed of giving. It required the sustained willingness to keep showing up in a life that was not always what I would have chosen, to honor commitments made in good faith, even when the circumstances they were made in had changed, to be present for children who needed the stability that the endurance provided. Those are genuine goods. They deserve the endurance they required. What I am saying is not that endurance was wrong. I am saying that endurance without honesty is endurance in the wrong direction. You can endure towards something, or you can endure away from something. Enduring away from something, which is what happens when you manage a life rather than living it, is endurance that produces stability without growth, continuity without development, the sustaining of a structure that is no longer serving its full purpose. My mother endured away from. She endured away from the life she might have had with a different person or in a different configuration. And the enduring protected something that was real and worth protecting. It did not build anything new. It maintained what was there until the maintaining was finished. I endured partly toward and partly away from, in proportions that shifted over the years, and that I am still calculating. In the years when the children were young and the stakes were highest, and the reasons for the endurance were clearest, I endured toward something real. In the years after that, when the reasons had shifted, and the life we were maintaining was the life we were maintaining rather than the life we were building, I endured away from. And the cost of that endurance was the unexpressed self I described earlier. The distinction matters because it is the distinction between making a choice and repeating a habit. Enduring towards something is a choice you renew regularly, with full awareness of what you are choosing and why. Enduring away from something is what happens when the original choice has become a habit that runs without the original awareness that initiated it. Renew the choice regularly, not the choice to leave or stay, that is a different choice. The choice about what you are bringing to the life you have. The choice about how much of the actual you is in the room. The choice about whether the version of yourself that is present in the marriage is the edited one or the real one. Renewing that choice requires honesty about what the current version looks like, which requires the willingness to look honestly at something that has been running on autopilot long enough that the autopilot has become invisible. Look honestly. The looking is the beginning of the knowing, and the knowing is where the choice becomes available. You may find that the marriage you are in is already holding the actual version of you, and that what felt like resignation was actually acceptance of the real thing. That is a good finding, and it is available. You may find something else. That is also a finding, and it is also available. And it is better to have it than to continue in the direction you were going without knowing what direction that was. I am Lillian. I found what I found at 74 when the marriage ended, and I have been working with what I found ever since. The working has been the most honest engagement with my own life I have had in decades. I hope you find yours sooner than I found mine. 52 years is a long time to wait for the honest version of your own life. But you can begin it today. Today is available. The honest version of you is available. Begin.